Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this session on developing local authority research systems in North East and North Cumbria. And we're going to hear from 3 of the successful NIHR projects and learn about working across infrastructures. So I'm first to introduce myself to those that don't know me. I'm Ashley Adamson, and it's my privilege to be the director of Fuse and also to welcome you all to the meeting today. So I'm just going to go on to the next slide, and we're going to, or before I do that, you can see the hashtag there for the meeting. So please do tweet as we go through if you wish. Okay, next slide, please. So you can see the programme here. We've got one late change to that. Unfortunately, Claire Humble is unwell today. So we'll be able to have a little bit longer on each of those and also into the panel discussion. We're going to have it slightly longer with for Professor Brian Ferguson too. So just before I introduce Brian, can I just go on to the next slide, please? So just, I think the usual rules of engagement apply. I think make sure your microphone is muted and everybody is, and just to help us streaming, stop your own video, but please do put your video on for the discussion sessions and any questions, and when we get to the panel discussion. We're going to be using the Q&A for the panel. We're going to be using the chat box, so we'll take some questions. Brian's agreed to take some questions in his session, and then other questions we'll have at the end and at the end of the presentations. So people will be monitoring the chat, so please do use that. And I think the other 2 are standard as standard throughout, but just to note, please. So next slide, please. I hope that Fuse needs absolutely no introduction to the vast majority of people that are here, but just to mind that we are a Centre of Excellence in Public Health Research, a virtual centre across all 5 North East universities, which are all featured down there below. And our USP is translational research in public health, working in partnership with policymakers and practitioners, and that we are a founding member of the School for the NIHR School for Public Health Research, and delighted that we are able to announce that that's now been renewed, and we are renewed as a member of the school through to 2027. So I think that's all I've got to say today. We've got a few things to celebrate, and also some opportunities that are emerging across local government, which we're going to have all in the chat as links. So the new Spark Award and Local Authority Fellowship Awards and lots of other things which are coming our way are all going to be listed in the chat as links, and we'll pick them up at the panel discussion. But it may be that Brian also will introduce some of these. So Brian, you're very welcome. Thank you for being with us today. Brian's going to talk about some of his vision around developing public health research systems to support local government. And Brian, you will know, has long history within Public Health England, but is now the Director of Public Health Research Programme for NIHR. So over to you, Brian. Thank you.
Thanks very much, and nice to see you, Ashley, and everyone. It's always a pleasure to join Fuse meetings, and I won't try and remember the first one I joined, but it's probably a very long time ago, but I still remember many of them fondly, particularly when we were able to meet face to face. As Ashley says, I'm only able to join for a short while this morning till about 10:30, but the joys are, I'll try not to make you jealous, but the joys of part-time working these days. I mean, I've already done my stint Tuesday to Thursday this week, but always very happy to join a few sessions. So it really is great to be here. I mean, Ashley just mentioned the point about a few things to celebrate. We probably ought to just pause for a second and celebrate the fact that PHE has done some fantastic work over the 8 years, and of course formally closed yesterday. So that's an end of an era. As many of you know, and Ashley certainly knows, I was hugely proud to have been part of PHE for 8 years, and I think it did some fantastic work, and some of you may have noticed that the gambling review material was all published yesterday on the final day of PHE. So I very much hope that the new Office for Health Improvement and Disparities will pick up some of the key research and other lessons that have been learnt from that. And certainly on the research side, as you'll know, gambling is an area we've put out calls recently and are looking to commission work. So that evidence review is really, really important. I think many of you know I took on the role in NIHR in July 2020 when I was still doing that part-time alongside the PHE role. One thing that's probably important to say is, aside from all the what I call the machinery of NIHR, in other words, all the research applications, the funding committees and so on, one of the other things that is a key part of my role, and the reason why it's a 2-day-a-week role rather than 1 day a week that Martin White and Catherine Law previously did, is because they want me to take a strategic look at the public health research landscape, particularly with this view to how do we support local government. And as Ashley and others might know, I produced a public health research landscape paper for the NIHR strategy board earlier this year, and that signalled a sort of 5 to 10 year vision for the programme. And there's a couple of initiatives in there that I'm going to say a little bit about today, but I think many of you will have heard of them or be familiar with them anyway, but I'll touch on those later. But really, really important that we see those initiatives within the context of developing a long-term strategy for public health research within local government. I'm just checking you can still hear me okay. My screen suddenly went to everybody with their videos off, and I'm just hoping there's no technical issue.
No, it's not, Brian. It's absolutely fine. I was hoping that when we stopped sharing, you would appear large on the screen and instead of the slide, but instead you're a little talking box. But it does mean we can focus on you, and rather than on just that slide.
That's fine.
Okay, you're fine. Thank you.
I wasn't talking into the ether there. That sometimes happens.
We can all hear you perfectly.
So I mean, when I was in touch with Peter and Ashley before today, I was thinking, shall I do the usual, a few PowerPoint slides, talk about the program? I'm not going to do that. I'm going to talk a little bit more, I guess, sort of in a sort of winning hearts and minds mode today, because I think NIHR has already done quite a lot to start to support local government. My predecessor did that, and there's been lots of great work that Helen Walters and others have done here. So I'm building on that. But the bottom line is we have to ramp this up at scale in a way that we just haven't done before. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. Before we talk about a public health research system in local government, I do think it's really, really important to understand the context. You can tell that I'm heavily influenced by my sociologist colleagues like Jenny Poppe, who always remind us rightly that context is important. But many of you will have heard me speak at various events over time about economics of prevention and the financial context that local government sits in. And I know you all know this, but I think it's important to demonstrate that we recognise that in NIHR. This is not just a case of taking a clinical research model and plopping it into local government. The local government has continues to have significant financial problems. We know the public health grant was cut by about a quarter between 2013 and 20. We know that local authorities have had a 60% cut in their funding over a similar period. So the bottom line is that any pound spent on R&D is a pound away from frontline services, and that is a very different context, I think, that the NHS often faces. But I think it's also really important to demonstrate understanding of what decision making in local government is like and what the particular challenges are. And there's a couple of papers that I nearly always refer to here. One is by Mike Kelly, who, as you'll know, wrote a paper a few years ago on evidence-based medicine. It was called Evidence-Based Medicine Meets Democracy. And it was all about the how you get evidence into decision making in local government. And the point I think that was very well made in the paper was that there is clearly a very strong tension between an environment where there's political decision making and democratic accountability versus trying to make decisions based on scientific evidence. Now, I don't personally think that's hugely different from the NHS, but it's undoubtedly different in the sense that there's that democratic accountability element, and there's a very clear tension between the two. And of course, the other work that's been done, very much Northeast led, was of course David Hunter's work, and Joe was heavily involved in that work, as were others. That looked at this whole question right back at when the public health moved into local government and the shifting the gravity of spend work. And one of the takeaway messages from that work was that, again, sort of quote scientific decision making, based on evidence, sat very uncomfortably with local government when it came to investment decisions. But there was a bit of an asymmetry there in the sense that when disinvestment decisions were being justified, actually the evidence and research base was incredibly useful. So that's just a little bit of a contextual couple of points, really, both about understanding the political environment and how decisions might be taken. And I think we have to think about that very carefully when we think about trying to develop a research culture within local government. The next thing I wanted to talk about was the whole translation agenda, and obviously that is absolutely centre stage to everything that Fuse does, right through to, I think, the strapline of Fuse. So, but the reason I wanted to touch on it is because I think there remains a tension that I think we'll find in the HDRCs that I'm going to talk about as well, about the extent to which you can do research in one place and translate that elsewhere. So the whole sort of adoption and spread or knowledge mobilization, whatever words you want to use, but the bottom line is, how do we take research that's done in one place and apply it elsewhere? And this is, I think, really, really important when it comes to influencing policymakers, whether it be locally, but certainly nationally. So, when you talk to people like Chris Whitty and others, who, as you'll know from his CMO report, is very, very, very interested in coastal health, the conversation with Chris and others around this agenda tends to be along the lines of, well, if we're tackling mental health and substance misuse in areas like Whitby, why would that not be transferable to Great Yarmouth or other coastal areas or Blackpool or wherever? And I know that when you get into academic debates about these things, people will again rightly talk about context, and they'll talk about complex adaptive systems and so on. And I get all that, but I think we really have to challenge ourselves about the extent to which we can take research evidence and apply it elsewhere. I think we often, as we do in the NHS, I think it's also true to some extent in local government, that we talk up difference between places rather than commonality between places. And I've got other examples in mind that I could use there, but won't in the interest of time. But there are two bits that come out of that for me. One is that let's really think hard about how we can take research findings from one place and apply them elsewhere, because we haven't got the money to fund the research everywhere. And the other one is the point that I know people like Catherine Law and others have made very well over the years around evidence-based public health, which is understanding how things work is just as important as what works. So that whole question of, how did something work in a particular place, and can we take that learning elsewhere? So those were some perhaps more generic thoughts about research environment in local government and what we need to do. But let me just touch briefly on the two initiatives that I said we're launching in NIHR, and I'm really excited that we've managed to do this, I think, quite quickly, slightly over a year into my tenure as program director. So the first is the health determinant research collaborations. And the C is hugely important there, the collaboration. So this is collaboration between HEI sector and local government, but the HDRCs will be there very much to support local government so that the work that's done is hugely relevant to their decisions. We ran a webinar back at the end of June on this, and we're looking at an early autumn launch. So the call closes, I think. So we launched it on the 1st of September, I think it was. And the closing date is the 23rd of November. In the first instance, we've secured a reasonable amount of money for this. We've secured about 5 million for this in the first year. But the plan is for that to be recurrent spending, which of course, as you know, depends on spending reviews and how successful we are. But the plan is for it to be recurrent. So, you know, if we turn the clock forward 5 years, I really want us to be in a position where we've got 25 to 30 of these HDRCs running around the UK. And in talking to the Local Government Association, they share that aspiration. That's the sort of number that we're talking about. So if we manage to launch about 5 in the first year, that may sound, you know, just a start, of course, is just a start, tip of the iceberg, but the plan is to expand and grow and get coverage both geographically as far as possible and topic-wise. So that's a hugely exciting initiative and very much local authority led. Many of you who know about the scheme already and have looked at it will know that we've got a couple of workshops coming up, one next Wednesday and then the other one on the 20th of October, which is basically for people who have submitted expressions of interest. So we'll be having 2 full days, having dedicated time with each of the teams that have put forward expressions of interest. So that I'm hugely excited about that. The other scheme is what we're calling the Population Health Career Scientist Award Scheme. And Ashley will probably be having a wry smile because she knows that this is something that I was hugely keen that we managed to launch. And I'm really delighted to say that we're going to be launching it next Wednesday. So jointly with the NIHR Academy. It's sooner than I expected, but I wanted to take the opportunity of launching it alongside the Advanced Fellowship call, which, as you will know, traditionally takes place in October, sometime in October and in April. So we may well have an April call as well for this, but we're pushing it out quickly next week. So there's been a tremendous amount of work to get all the documentation done for that, the guidance done. And again, we'll be looking to run webinars and workshops for people who are interested. But the one liner on this is, what is it about? It's about developing the next generation of population health research leaders. So some of whom are on the call today and will know about the scheme that was previously there in the 2000s. So I probably won't say any more about that other than to say, well, perhaps a couple of things. One is it's absolutely meant to complement the existing initiatives in the NIHR Academy, and we're working very closely with the Academy on this. I've got a joint blog with the new Dean of the Academy that we're planning to launch planning to get up on the website next week alongside the launch. We're working really closely with Lisa Cottrell, the Chief Executive of the Academy. And so this is a joint initiative between the Academy and the Public Health Research Programme. But we've secured £5 million through the Public Health Research Programme to fund this in the first year. And again, I've been told to plan for that being recurrent. So I'm hoping we get to a sort of cohort model. Again, it will be hugely focused on local government, so the research programs will have to demonstrate support and relevance to local government. We're also very keen to attract applications from non-traditional disciplines. And the reason why we're launching both those schemes more or less together is because they're meant to be complementary. So one very much academic based, one very much local government based, but both dealing with an agenda that's hugely relevant to local government. And I hope that, and I know synergies are an overused word, but the aim is to get true synergy from this. I mean, those of you who know the research world know that success breeds success. You know, you get grants in, it allows you to develop capacity to bid for income from elsewhere, that draws in income from elsewhere, you grow young research talent, you get leadership, for it all hangs together, and you do, I believe, get a success breeds success model there. And it's all, the final thing to say on that, it's all, as I said at the start, very much part of a long-term game, and very much part of a very crowded, which I see as a good thing, crowded public health research landscape that, of course, includes the great work of the School for Public Health Research, the UK PRP, and so on. So this is one part of a jigsaw, if you like. Now, a couple of final areas that I wanted to cover before stopping. One I've touched on already, which is this is a long-term game. So the NHS R&D infrastructure has been there for about 30 years. It's taken a long time to build that. So we're not going to do this overnight, but the first tranche of HDRCs, and I hope the first tranche of Career Scientist Awards will really give some momentum to what's a really exciting journey to build local government research capacity. The public health research system, as I've said already, is not a clinical research system. It has to be absolutely fit for purpose. And Ashley and others will remember, I've often used the phrase in NIHR that we tend to shoehorn public health and social care into a clinical research model, and it doesn't work, frankly. We need something that's absolutely fit for purpose for the public health system. The other thing that I want to say, and I'm not just playing to a Northeast audience here, but I think is really important to say is that I do see places like the Northeast as hugely well placed to do this. And the reason for that is because when I think of the Northeast, I always think of quite stable and strong relationships, despite all the political turmoil you get in NHS change and so on. So there's a tremendous opportunity to build research capacity in local government because of that. And of course, the collaboration between HEI and local government sectors is absolutely critical, and today demonstrates how much infrastructure is already in place on that. So let me close with just one final set of thoughts. And it's a sort of last but not least one, and it's health inequalities and deprivation. So it's being serious about that. I very much see the focus for work on health inequalities being local government as part of ICSs, but I do have a strong view on this, which many of you have heard me say before, which is that the NHS will not see this as top priority, and particularly post-pandemic, when there's all the focus on waiting lists and catching up around elective surgery. This has to be driven hugely by local government, and hence the HDRCs and other initiatives that focus on the wider determinants. And in any case, as we know, there's a limit to what the NHS can do to really seriously tackle this. You only need to look at reports like the IFS report on inequalities in the education sector that have been worsened by the pandemic to know that we've got fundamental problems in making sure that those from disadvantaged communities access what they need and get the start in life they need, which will help to impact on health and well-being later. So although levelling up is the sort of political language, it does give us the legitimacy to focus really hard on what can be done to tackle inequalities and wider deprivation. And we need convincing evidence of what works and how it works in particular communities. That's what we need to influence Treasury and make Treasury realise that tackling inequalities and the levelling up agenda is important. There's so much we need to do in that area, but I'll stop there. But my message is we need to fight on multiple fronts on that. So we need better data. We need innovative use of current data sets and modelling. We need to target interventions where they're genuinely most needed. And again, it's about the fundamental determinants, which includes poverty. So I shall stop there, Ashley.
Okay, thank you very much, Brian. And I can see that Leslie's busy posting things which are the opportunities that you've talked about in the chat, and really exciting to know that the Career Scientists Awards will be out next week and we can pick that up in the panel. I know there'll be quite a few questions about the HDRCs, and it is presenting that sort of challenge for us in terms of FUSE and the 5 North East universities, and that's probably something else we'll pick up in our discussion later on, you know, as a group that's used to working very collaboratively, but I'm sure that will come out in our discussions. There's a question, I think, from Joe in the chat asking about what the model would look like. Joe, I wonder if you could just explain what you mean. Do you mean which model are you referring to? Could you perhaps ask your question directly to Brian, please?
Yeah, sorry. Hi, everybody. Good morning. Yeah, Brian. So you talk about, and sorry, I agree that, you know, we need a very different public health research system that doesn't mirror the clinical research model. I just wondered if you could expand on that. Are you thinking about sort of, well, obviously there's the how, but are you thinking about the what, sort of the different types of sort of research capacity?
Okay, thank you, Joe. So Brian, I'm going to check the chat to see if anybody else wants to come in, but we're just going to take a couple of short questions. I'm very much aware of your time and that you need to be elsewhere. So perhaps if you can respond to that, and if anybody's got anything else they'd like to ask of Brian.
Thanks, Ashley, and thanks, Joe, for the question. I mean, I think I mean a whole range of things, to be honest, when I talk about this. I think most importantly, what I mean is that we need dedicated funding to support a public health research network. And my view on what I've seen so far from being within NIHR is that public health does not get much airtime in the clinical research network space, and that there are exceptions to that. I mean, Ashley and I have talked about this quite a lot. There's some great work being done around the country, but it is quite sporadic, and it's fighting for resources that inevitably find their way more to the clinical end of things. And that there's no problem with that. But I think what I'm saying is we need a model that works for public health, and I could add social care there as well, but in the interest of time, we've got enough to do in public health. But we're having a dialogue, I guess, within NIHR about what the right model is for public health research going forwards, so that it really does get the resource and the attention it needs. I think that's probably the only thing I'll say at the moment, because there's so many layers beneath that, but that's the overall intention.
Okay, thank you, Brian. And we've got our director of ours, LCRN, who's Caroline Rowe, with us on the panel later on today. So perhaps an opportunity to ask that. I think there's a question I'm going to ask a brief answer in the chat, just asking about the geographical spread of the health research collaborations and topic when there's a particular focus on a single local authority for the applications. So I think the question is just asking how do those two
good question. Yeah. And look, I'm the first thing I'm going to say is I'm not going to pretend we've got all the answers to this, okay? Because we're working it out with you, and rightly, I think, with you. But the conversations we typically have, and this is partly why I've got the workshops lined up, is almost what we're trying to do is encourage as many innovative proposals and expressions of interest as possible, because you, in many ways, you're the best people to know how you might do this. And so what we're trying to do is leave things open to people. So while it's undoubtedly the case we need a single host institution, host local authority for a HDRC, what I really want to see is that strong collaboration between, first of all, between the local authority and the whatever academic institutions they're partnering with, but also this question about how does the work that the HDRC does, how is it going to be used and impact upon other places that face similar problems? Now that may involve collaborations of local authorities going into it, or it may just involve really strong translation and mechanisms for knowledge mobilization. either of these models, or however many of these models, can work. And I'm really looking forward to seeing the proposals that have come in, having the conversations on the 6th and the 20th. But we'll be working this out as we go along. But the bottom line is the ones that we fund will be the ones that are really strong in terms of their demonstrated collaboration between academia and local government, and that they've got topics that they can not only do valuable research in, but can share that research as far as possible around the country.
Thank you, Brian. There's a question from Alice Wiseman saying that about the university collaborating with the HDRCs and asking, can we clarify whether universities can partner with more than one local authority? I think you're nodding, because I was going to say, I think the answer to that is absolutely yes. But so it's one local authority, but that local authority, a university can collaborate with as many local authorities as it feels it has capacity to support, I guess, is the answer to that.
The only constraint from our side is purely a contractual one, which is there has to be a host local authority institution that's holding the contract, but that's really the only constraint.
Brilliant. Okay, so thank you very much, Brian. I think that we can all agree this is a really exciting time for public health and for local authorities in public health and academia in public health. I like the fact that you're flagging that this has taken 30 years in the NHS and that we're in this for a long game. I hope that everybody else around appreciates that and are not expecting the world to change in 2 years. And that the funding stream is able to continue on this, because I think it is going to take a while for this all to establish. But the contributions that we've got coming in, and much of it has been the work that you've put in place in that first year of tenure, only a year, has been fantastic. So I think we're just going to thank you for joining us this morning. Let you get on with the rest of your day, and we'll move on to the rest of our programme, and we'll look forward to seeing you soon, Brian. Thank you very much.
Ashley, and just to say thank you to you and everybody associated with Fuse for the great work you do, genuinely great work you do, and will continue to do, I know. So Ashley, you and I can pick up anything that comes out of today that you might need further clarity on, but otherwise do join the HDRC and career scientist workshops and webinars when they're advertised.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Brian.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Okay, thanks everybody. So I think now I'm handing over to Peter, who's going to chair the rest of the morning session. Thank you, Peter.
That's great. Thank you very much, Ashley, and great thanks to Brian for doing a wonderful scene setting exercise here, and lots of questions to take to the panel. And there's been lots of things already dropped in the chat, some of the opportunities that Brian was talking about. So feel free to have a look at those, and please keep those questions coming. But at this stage, I'd like to hand over to Dr. Joe Gray, who is an associate professor at Northumbria University, and two of her colleagues, which she worked with on the project on local authority research systems in South Tyneside, which is Dr. Dilupa Sabara Loon, if I pronounced correctly, apologies, Senior Research Fellow also at Northumbria University, and her colleague, Dr. Angela Bates at Northumbria University, who they all work together as a team on this project, and they will present on the findings for you. So Joe and colleagues, and Dilupa and Angela, over to you, please.
Hi, good morning, everybody again, and thank you for this opportunity to share the initial work that was funded by the NIHR to look at developing research capacity and capability within South Tyneside Council. This research work was a collaboration with a number of organisations, ourselves, Northumbria University, Newcastle, Inspire, as well as the North East Commissioning Support Unit. Next slide, please. So really what I wanted to sort of drive home here is that this was very, very much about co-creation, building on enhancing the existing infrastructures and work within South Tyneside with a very strong sort of co-creation lens with the council itself, whilst sort of capitalising on existing regional public health research activity. Next slide, please. So our objectives, obviously, to enhance and build on existing work in South Tyneside. What we did to try and enhance that was we did a needs assessment to explore what research needs was required within the council, and indeed what capacity was there. And some of that work is still ongoing, which I'm sure Anna Christie or Tom Hall will sort of speak to in the panel discussion. We also wanted to explore how the council interacts and collaborates within regional existing structures, and to understand if indeed members of the council sort of knew about those existing research structures within the region and nationally indeed. We also wanted to synthesize the findings and co-create something that looked like a research capacity framework. So what was needed on the basis of the research that we did, so what was needed to try and develop some kind of framework to enhance the capacity and capability within the council. And what we did through a consensus and working with the council, we eventually produced a research capacity toolkit, which incorporated sort of the findings of the research. It incorporated our framework, and indeed we also co-produced a roadmap for research, so that could be used by the council and signposted the council to different sort of partners who could help the council on their journey. Next slide, please. So I'm going to hand over to my colleague now, DeLuca.
Hi. Yes, so I'm going to talk about how we went about with the data collection and what we found. So a mixed method approach was used to understand the utilization of research by the South Tyneside employees. And we did an online survey and 6 focus groups. We also had a consensus development workshop like what Joe mentioned before, and with the research team and the steering group. And this was used to develop the questionnaire, the focus group questions, and research capacity toolkit. Next slide, please. So the survey was conducted by emailing out about online questionnaires to all the employees of South Tyneside. That was about 2,881 employees altogether. 124 responded, and that was about 4.3%. We wanted the questionnaires to be able to allow them to reflect on their use of research and gather information regarding their employment, basically about how long they've been in the local authority role, how long they've been in the authority itself, and their qualifications. These were close-ended questions that we used for these. And then the survey also looked at their knowledge of research and their confidence. So this covered many topics of engagement internally and externally with research partners, and how often they'd use research in their role, and if they did or did not use it, etc. Likert scales were used to measure their responses for that. And survey data was analyzed using SPSS, using parametric and non-parametric statistical tests. And forward stepwise linear regression was used to explore staff roles, qualifications, grades, and any relationships there. Next slide, please. Right, so this is about the focus groups. So once we did the survey participants were then invited to one of 6 focus groups. The idea was to get as much rich data by exploring the survey questions further, the employees' definitions of what research was, if it was significant in their roles, barriers and enablers, and the basic research culture within their department and with each other, to name a few. So the focus group recordings were then transcribed, and thematic framework analysis was done to get emerging themes for us to assess. Next slide, please. Right, so we just now look at what we found from the survey first, and enthusiasm and confidence for engagement was really evident, and not only in the survey, but also in the focus group. We'll talk about that in a bit, but senior managers and managers were seen to be the most likely to engage with research activities, and having a postgraduate degree was a significant predictor of confidence and continuous engagement as well. The main barriers, no surprise really, but was that the lack of time. And this trickled down to even when they were likely to engage in training in the next 12 months, with time again being a barrier where they thought that they wouldn't have time to actually be able to be available for the training. Next slide, please. So the focus group, again, confidence and enthusiasm was very high. And one of the most interesting themes that we found that emerged from that focus group, which the survey data was sort of unable to pick up in depth to the depth that we wanted, was a definition and understanding of what research meant and how it's used in their roles. So we provided the employees with a very clear definition of what research was in the context of how they would use it. So apart from the public health department and their employees there, the definitions deviated from the academic and NIHR norms that was used in the survey and the focus group as a definition. And it was evident that the secondary research of grey literature dominated their research activity in the majority of times. So some of the barriers, again, that were noted from this was the lack of time, access to funding, lack of training, and engagement with the internal and external research groups, and changes within the research culture from different departments was also noted. So I'll hand you now over to my colleague, Angela, who'll talk about the next 2 slides. Thank you.
Hi, next slide, please. Okay, no, sorry, yeah, go back. So in terms of discussion and recommendations, so from the findings, we developed a proposal around a research capacity toolkit, which really took on a 3-pronged approach around developing research capacity going forward. The first of those was around upskilling of local authority and local government personnel and embedding research skills within the daily or routine activities that are undertaken within local government. Second was really around developing the research infrastructure and support and elevating the importance of research within the local authority. So the importance of having those research infrastructures, but also having key personnel who promoted the research activities and embedded them within the organisation. And third was really around acknowledgement that fundamental changes are required in both research funding organisations and academic institutions in order to incentivise joint working on priorities that are identified by local authorities that impact on the health and well-being of local populations. So the funding structures and the way that universities currently measure research inhibit a lot of that collaboration at present, and those barriers need to be looked at. Next slide, please. And the expected outcomes and impacts of the work then, in terms of if we can crack these kind of 3 approaches, so look at the upskilling, look at developing the research infrastructure, and look at increasing incentives for collaborative working within local authorities, then we're looking at some of the things that Brian talked about, which are improvements around the effectiveness of services that are delivered at the local level, looking at outcomes, but also looking at the benefits in terms of potential financial savings to the local authority, and financial savings not only within the local authority but further down the line that potentially accrue to other organisations as well. Increasing those partnerships, increasing those research collaborations, and allowing the transferability and the translation of research across not only other local authorities but across different research infrastructures, moving into academia and also third sector as well. And I believe that's where we finish.
Great, thanks very much, Angela, DeLuca and Joel. Great presentation, and interesting to see all those findings emerging from the survey and the focus groups. And I think some of those points we can hopefully pick up in the panel discussion. So please save your questions and put them in the chat so we can pick them up that way. At this point, I would like to move on to the next presentation. As Ashley already mentioned, Claire Humble is unfortunately not able to join us this morning due to illness, but we will make a presentation available after the event so you can have a look at the experiences of this project in Newcastle City Council. But I would like to introduce as the next speakers Professor Dorothy Newbury-Birch, or more affectionately known as Dot, who works as a Professor of Alcohol and Public Health Research at Teesside University, and Scott Lloyd, who's an advanced public health practitioner for South Tees Public Health, and they've been working on projects well, for a similar funding scheme, but then focused on Middlesbrough Council and Redcar and Cleveland Borough Council. So very keen to hear their results. So the floor is yours, really, Dot and Scott. And can we move to the next slide, please? Thank you very much.
I think I've now got control, so I'll try and do this myself. So yes, we're going to talk about the work which was similar to the work in South Tyneside, which we did in South Tees. So Middlesbrough Council and Redcar and Cleveland Borough Council working with Teesside University. We had a wide-ranging team, specifically to bring the expertise around the wider determinants of health. So Tracy from social care background, for example. No, sorry, got that wrong. Diane from social care, Tim from kind of a planning background. So I think everyone knows about the kind of poorer health in the northeast, and also how the region has been hit hard by the COVID pandemic. As a civic university, Teesside University has got a role to play in that. And in May 2019, we Public Health South Tees signed a memorandum of understanding with Teesside University. So to date, the MOU has focused specifically around collaborations between public health, which is, as I said, is a shared function between the two local authorities and the university. It's done things such as we've taught on master's and doctoral programs from a practice side. We are involved in suggesting topics for the professional doctorate students in public health and then mentoring them during those studies. And then the university supports us around evidence and research and training and various other things. So one of the primary kind of goals of this work was to look at how that was working and also make recommendations for the future. So we had 6 different objectives. So first one being look at how the MOU is operationalizing in practice, how it can potentially be extended to other areas of the local authority. So at that point, we were aware that our regeneration colleagues were considering a similar arrangement. We also wanted to do surveys of staff and councillors and also other colleagues from the local system around how research evidence is used. We also had a deep dive into 3 specific departments. So we wanted to look at how research could be support activity in children's services, planning and regeneration. And we also had a strong emphasis on PPI. And with that, I'll pass you over to Dot.
So yes, we actually did far too much work within the 4 months, but we wanted to do as much as we could. And one thing that I should say is we wanted it to be developed on co-production and in co-production with the individual partners. It's something that we've been doing for a long time. At Durham, 9 years now, but in Middlesbrough, we've been doing it. My team's been working with Middlesbrough for about 1.5 years now, doing co-production research. So we did a survey. We did 4 sessions with members of the community, which of everything, we felt that was so important. And we did some interviews and focus groups. So we did a lot. You can see we did 59 in 4 months. Next session. Next slide, sorry. This is just telling you what we did. We, for the qualitative work, we used framework analysis, but we were really keen to use normalization process theory to see how changes could be made in the future. Next slide, please. Next slide. So what we found, no, previous slide. what we found was the same as I suspect we would find in any local authority in the country. You know, it's all about, you know, the aims of the MOU. Sorry, I've got Joe's emails now. Joe, your emails are being shared. Can somebody sort this out?
Sorry, they're not mine. I don't know who's the word, but they're not mine.
Oh, they said Joe Gray on them. Sorry, I've lost my way now. We wanted to look at the aims of the MOU, and one thing we knew before we started, but we wanted to do a bit more work on, was it was doing really well in terms of teaching and enterprise, but we wanted to really look at the research strand of it in a lot of detail. So we wanted to look at, so what we found was things about facilitators, but also about challenges of doing research. As one very high up person said to me, I'm not interested in a randomized control trial. We need to know something that can make a difference to our population tomorrow, not in 7 years. Next slide. So these are the things that we found. We found, as we have in Durham, that people are really open to this. They want embedded researchers. They don't, you know, they don't have to be there all the time. They're really keen that they have the link to the universities and do that. But they see that it's a really good way of engaging with evidence base across the two institutions. Next slide. I'm aware of time, so I'm whizzing through this. We did do a survey which was not well, as you can see, not well, you know, people didn't fill it in. Let's all remember we were going through a pandemic at the time, but the same sort of thing came through. Communication, involvement of community, what is evidence, working collaboratively, and governance and structure. Governance and structure is something that's really hard to work out, and hopefully these new NIHR things will help with, well, the purpose of them is to help with that. Next slide. What we found very interestingly and not surprisingly was everybody's got a different view. And how do we take that all into account when we're looking at this? The reality is it all comes down to inequalities, and you know how, especially within Middlesbrough and South Tees, this is an issue we really need to look at. Next slide. Within the community group, we had between 10 and 15 people, and we had 4 sessions, and they worked really well. We had to do them online, which was a bit of a shame, but actually we got a diverse group of people, and we had babies on knees and all sorts of things, so it worked out really well. They were recorded and transcribed, and we used Padlet, which actually worked really well for this, and it was only shared with those who attended the particular session to which it pertained, so we didn't share it with people who didn't turn up for a session. Next slide. So we found that people really wanted to be involved in making change. You know, we did have people who worked for charities, we did have people who were just members of the community, but people really wanted to be part of change and had some really good ideas of how we could recruit people. One of the things we wanted to talk about was how can we involve members of the community who we wouldn't normally involve. We all know the community groups tend to be people, you know, who put themselves forward. How do we get to people who don't put themselves forward? And of course, the answer is you go to them rather than them come to you. So it was really, really interesting. They were really open, and it just gave us so much information. Next slide, please. So I'm not going to go through all of this, but what we had loads of recommendations. They wanted a mission statement. They wanted to know who stuff was being disseminated to and why. It was all about politics with a small p, about who's involved, what is the purpose of this, and you know, that thing about honesty and being involved was really good. But those who were involved on both sides shouldn't make unrealistic promises to each other, which, you know, is very easy to do. Next slide, please. So this was the bare bones. We've started developing. This is what we came up with at the time. Now it looks completely different. But actually, what we called it a research ecosystem. And we said we want community involvement at the heart of that before, you know, or wrapped into what we were doing. And it had separate and diverse but interlinked things that we needed to think about. And we were looking at this not just if somebody gave us funding, but how can we do co-production research like we do with Durham, where we're given, and we do in Middlesbrough as well, where we're given little bits of money to do something quite quickly. So it's not just about the big funding, it's about little funding as well. Champions, everything we do has to have champions. And data sharing agreements. Data sharing is just a nightmare. It's been a nightmare the whole 20 years I've been working. And it's something that we still haven't got to grips with. In fact, I think it's got harder. Next slide, please. So we asked them in terms of the MPT, what key components we need. And it was all about the things that we know. It was about partnerships, it was about regular training, but it wasn't about, you know, coming to a 2-hour lecture. It was training that was necessary for them to be able to do a job. So for instance, when we started at Durham, they never had an introduction to a report. So now we have an introduction that tells us what the evidence is in that area before you start talking about what you do. And interestingly, and I don't think this is just about the other side, just about the LA, but it's about the university as well. It's about flexibility to consider staff turnover, and it goes back to the champions. You know, you have a couple of people who are really keen on an idea and work really hard on it, and then somebody leaves. How do you keep that going? There needs to be some structure in place. Now that's easy to do when you're getting £5 million, but it's harder to do if you're just doing small pieces of research. Next slide. Scott's going to come back for this one.
Okay, so we had a wide range of recommendations. I'm not going to read through them all. I guess a couple of key ones. So how can we use the MOU? So how can we develop that further internally? Other local authority departments, really keen to look into that as well. How do we use that to secure the additional external research funding and embed research, etc. There was also this point about, and kind of it was covered in the South Tyneside one, about the latent skills of staff in local authority. We do have a whole raft of staff who've got postgraduate degrees, PhDs. Those PhDs aren't necessarily always relevant. One of my colleagues has got a PhD from 25 years ago when he was looking at extinct land snails, but he has still got a PhD and he has still got some of those research skills. So there is a lot of latent skills within local authorities, just identifying them and potentially involving them as champions. So we're now taking this work forward and happy to take any questions.
Thanks very much, Scott, and Dot, very much appreciate. Thank you, the whistle tour of your project, and nice to see sort of the emerging findings. I think there's an overlap with the previous project, and hopefully we can pick that up in the panel discussion. So please keep your questions coming in the chat. It's working again now, and nice to see sort of the focus on co-production as well, on community involvement, and that's an interesting element to pick up as well in that discussion. So thank you very much. I'm aware we're running a bit behind schedule, so I just briefly want to introduce our last speaker of this first part of the meeting before we have a little break. So bear with us. I propose that we sort of do a break in 10 minutes time, and then people can go into the panel discussion. But without further ado, can I please introduce Caroline Rowe, who's the clinical director for the Clinical Research Network in the North East and North Cumbria, and she will talk about how the CRN can support your research. Caroline, very welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. I know how important a decent coffee break is, so I am actually going to nip this down a little bit, you'll be pleased to know. I think, you know, the first thing I would say is, having listened to the other speakers, I think they've really laid the foundations and groundwork in the region and highlighted some of the challenges. And as you hear my introduction and hear the word clinical research network and clinical director, you can see some of the challenges and the barriers around the NIHR infrastructure. So although the word clinical is in there, and I will use it a bit, I want us to just sort of ignore that. We are on a journey together about how we can resource the public health and social care research infrastructure in the region. So if we go to the next slide, please. So I thought I'd just say, what is the CRN? Next slide, please. So the map to your right-hand side at the bottom there just shows the different clinical research networks across England, and the devolved nations have a similar setup. And it's basically part of the NIHR infrastructure that funds and coordinates research deliveries and support staff. So it either directly employs or funds more than 14,000 staff. It's in every NHS trust in England and in thousands of GP practices. So about, depending on which region you're in, about 30 to 50% of GP practices are research active. And then more recently, over the last couple of years, we've seen an expansion in non-NHS settings, including care homes, hospitals, local authorities, dental surgeries, community pharmacies, schools and prisons. Chris Whitty has been really driving that from a national perspective, but obviously Fuse and the community here with the School of Public Health have been leaders in this area already. And as I said, there are 15 regions and there are 30 clinical research specialties, and public health is now a specialty and has a leadership role in each of those clinical research networks. And I'm delighted that Sarah Sowden leads that for us in our region. Next slide, please. So that just gives a list of the partners in our region, and they're all represented on our board. We'll move on to the next slide, please. So let's just give some practical examples of what we've done. Next slide, please. So I've just pulled together some information about what the research network has done in the last year. So if we first look at our workforce, as I say, there's the specialty group leads, we have an executive and a strategic partnership group, of which public health and social care are represented. And we currently fund about 830 research delivery staff. And we have our own core team, which has study support services, learning and development training, admin, business intelligence, project management, communication and engagement, and well-being. And all of those core team resources are available to anyone who's interested in becoming an investigator in research in our region. And in terms of finance, we're one of the, we've got a decent budget from the NIHR, so £18 million comes through. Last year that was increased to 19.3 to help us cover the urgent public health studies, and that's split between our partners, and 15.8 million is currently going directly to support research delivery staff, and the predominance of that is currently within the NHS, but we have seen an expansion of that into public health and social care. Next slide, please. So just to tell you a little bit about it, we've had 66,000 people participate in 520 studies over the last year. We do a participant in research survey experience. So for those of you that are thinking about doing research where you actually recruit a particular individual, we can support and get feedback from what their experience of taking part in research was. And in our region, 96% said they would consider taking part in research again. We've produced resources to engage with our underserved communities, and this is an example of how we worked with one of our local communities to support them understand the COVID vaccine registry and how you might participate in it. We were the top region for Enrich, which is looking at enabling research in care homes. And we have a whole host of research champions who gave about 200 hours of their time to support work across our different chief investigators. Next slide, please. Again, we've worked with the NHS trusts, particularly, as I said, 43,000. So you can still see that they are the predominant source of participants in terms of traditional recruitment in terms of numbers of people, but we've also worked with the patients and public. An example is we set up a learning disability research support group in partnership with Lord Mayor's Theatre Company. We partner with different bits of the NIHR infrastructure, such as the ARC and the Academic Health Science Network. Next slide, please. And particularly when we're thinking around partnerships in public health and social care, we've created new roles in local authorities to support public health and social care research. We're part of the Newcastle Health Improvement Partners. We've worked with nearly 200 GP practices, and we've worked with the public and patients, again, around mothers and babies and how you engage new mums in research. Next slide, please. I think we'll probably, I'll tell you what, I'll go on to the next one because I'm conscious of time. And yeah, so this is really a list of some of the things that we've done in non-NHS research settings. So Green Shoots Award, which was mentioned in the chat earlier on, is some protected funding for up to 2 years to help people support them, protect a bit of their time to develop their research skills. We also have research delivery awards, so we'll fund individuals who slightly further on in their research career to give them a bit of protected time. Then the targeted health needs awards, which are also, we're talking about them, they will start at the beginning of next calendar year, but we've awarded some this year to public health and social care partners, and that's to develop your research project to enable it to either develop capacity amongst staff or to have a greater reach across the region. We fund public health engagement leads, we fund 2 directors of public health for a little bit of their time, and we have local authority research operations officers. Next slide, please. So in terms of translational research, across the NIHR, more than 1 million people took part in health and social care research studies, and that's increased from the year before. But it's totally fair to say, as Brian said, it's public health and social care is the smaller part of what the NIHR was set up to do, and we're hoping to see that change. And particularly in this region, we all acknowledge within the CRN that having 2 outstanding NHS Foundation trusts hasn't impacted on any of the challenges around health inequalities. And as a CRN, we're passionate about supporting our public health and social care colleagues to really help us answer some of these challenges. So next slide, please. So a little bit about the study support service. So this helps researchers to develop, set up and deliver research. And we provide a range of services across eligible studies. And anyone who gets a study on the CRN NIHR portfolio, and that not all studies do go on, so come and ask for advice about that, we can provide support free of charge. So next slide, please. The Department of Health and Social Care gave the NIHR some extra money last year and said, set up a direct delivery team workforce across England. And this is a workforce that you can send into particular areas to do research and support research teams where needed. And so if we go to the next slide, please, I'll carry on talking about that. For us, we've had about £800,000 to create this workforce, and we're going to be using it in public health and social care as we learn to partner with each other going forward. If we go to the next slide, please. I'm going to suggest we go on to the next slide, and I'll give a practical example. Let's keep going. I know that I'm conscious of time, so if we get on to MapMe, that's it. I think if I can give you some context of what we can do, it will perhaps be more meaningful. So if we think about the MapMe study, in terms of early contact and engagement, our kind of team will help you complete what's called a SOCAT form, which most of you, if you know what it is, then you're probably sort of head in your hands at the moment. It's a costing tool for research. They can be clunky and difficult, and our team are learning how to do it really well with our public health and social care colleagues. So we're learning how to do it in this space as well, but you know, we've got that support for you. We can help with portfolio adoption and eligibility advice. and some regulatory submissions advice. In terms of study setup, a research operations manager would be allocated to you, so you get to know them as an individual. They'll help coordinate and provide support to access additional sites. They will work with the team to organise and plan the requirement in terms of liaising with different members across the NIHR. And then they'll also liaise with the national team around study-specific challenges, so if you're having problems and that sort of thing. In terms of performance monitoring, we would help you set up a performance monitoring plan and communicate that back to you so that you can see if there are any challenges that are identified early, and then we can support with that. In terms of supporting other clinical research networks to set up studies, an example with MapMe is that there was a recent meeting with the Isle of Wight team to talk about how we could help and what do they need to do. In terms of data processing, we can support in terms of providing someone to help you get that data and support with the anonymisation of data and addition of participant ID and issues around that. In terms of the delivery staff, we will actually allocate you a member of the team with appropriate skill set to help work in that area, and would also support with the finance. I'm going to suggest I stop at that point. I think there's probably a couple more slides, but I've hopefully given you a bit of a whistle-stop tour, and there is a little bit of time for coffee.
Thank you very much, Caroline, for that helpful overview of the support offer from the Clinical Research Network, and great to see that expanding into non-clinical settings, particularly in public health and social care, and particularly translational research support, which is very, very welcomed and helpful to have an example to see how that can work in practice. So thank you very much. I appreciate that the timing was a bit short, and I also understand you won't be able to join us in the second part, but Sarah Solon has kindly agreed, your colleague, to take questions on your behalf. So please keep those questions coming, and some of the opportunities that Caroline mentioned have been posted in the chat now, so feel free to have a look. And what we will do, we'll make a list of all these opportunities, because there's a lot being posted available afterwards, so you can have a look at those at your leisure, including the presentation slides. So thank you very much at this point in time to our speakers. I just want to highlight that we're going into a break now. We're running a bit behind time, but that's okay. We still got some nice time left after the break. Can I ask you to come back here in about 5 minutes time? So can I say 11:20, and then we go into the panel discussion with all our speakers and some additional high profile people from the different research infrastructures to take your questions and look at, so how can we support research systems in local authorities across the research infrastructure. So don't go anywhere, have a quick wander and break, get a fresh cup of coffee, and I'll see you back in 5 minutes. Thank you very much. 11:20 on my watch. Thank you. The recording has started. Hope everybody had a nice short break. Welcome back to this event. And we're now moving into the second part, looking at the panel discussion. So this is your time, really. You had a lot of information from speakers this morning, and hopefully that was helpful. But this is your chance to raise some questions with our panel members and speakers. So I would like to invite the speakers from this morning and also some additional panel members who will introduce themselves shortly to put their camera and microphones on. And can we maybe stop sharing the screen so we can see those people better, please? There you go, some lovely faces. Thank you very much. Can I just maybe quickly ask all the panel speakers to briefly introduce themselves, to say your name and which sort of organization you represent. And then we'll spend the first 15 minutes of the panel discussion looking at some of the questions that have been fielded in the chat. But I would also like to look at the wider question that we posed for the panel. So how can we support research systems in local authority across the different research infrastructures that you represent? So in this case, I'm just going to pick up people from how I see them on my screen. Sarah, can I ask you first maybe to introduce yourself briefly?
Of course, pleasure to be with everyone today. Good morning, everyone. My name's Sarah Sowden. For those of you who don't know me, I know many on the call, but not everyone. So my role for the panel today is in my capacity as the Public Health Specialty Lead for the Clinical Research Network, which Caroline was just talking about before the break. I also wear several other hats, which is probably worth just saying because people may know me from different other contexts. So I also work as a consultant in public health at the Office for Health Improvement and Disparities, as of today, formerly Public Health England, as of yesterday, in the North East region. And I also work as a clinical lecturer at Newcastle University. Delighted to be with you all.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Nice to have you on board. Can I next ask Eileen to introduce herself?
Hi, yeah, so happy to have my camera re-enabled. I'm Eileen Kane, a Professor of Public Health and Primary Care at Newcastle. I'm here primarily because I'm the Director of the Applied Research Collaboration for the North East and North Cumbria. But while we try a few hats on, I'll also mention that I'm Deputy Chair of the Advanced Career Fellowships Panel, and Brian mentioned the Public Health Career Scientist Fellowship opportunities. I'm an ex-primary care career scientist from far too many years ago, but those fellowships will be coming through that panel. And I was a co-applicant on the Newcastle Local Authority Systems bid. So whilst Claire can't be here, if there were any questions about that, I might be able to help.
That's great, Eileen. Thank you. Nice to know those different hats. So any questions about those other opportunities, we'll definitely fill them for you. Next up, can I please ask Ashley to introduce herself?
Hi everybody. I already introduced myself this morning. I guess just a couple of things to say in this context. I think just to mention the Local Authorities Champion of Research project that Peter, Mandy and others were involved in on that from the Health Foundation, which very much speaks to some of the work that was presented this morning, and also links to the New Health Determinants Research collaboration that was presented. I've put a couple of things in the chat which are new opportunities, but I think, and I'm very happy to pick up any of those. I'm also here as the Director of FUSE, but also for the School of Public Health Research, and in the new renewal, once again renewed as the Director of that for the next 5 years. So I'm really proud that in the North East we're leading the School for Public Health Research and the opportunities that brings. I just want to just take a moment to celebrate success from Scott Lloyd, who is one of the inaugural holders of the Pre-Doctoral Local Authority Research Fellowships, which is one of the new opportunities. I think, and also to, like Eileen, I was one of the Career Scientist Award holders too, so we can say a little bit more about that in the chat. So yeah, lots of congratulations to Scott. It's great that we've got one of these new awards right in the region, and also that it's Scott. So a long time friend of FUSE. That's enough from me, Peter.
Thank you very much, Ashley. And absolutely great to celebrate that, Scott. So we'll get some cake out at some point, which is long overdue, Scott. Last but not least, Tom Hall, would you like to introduce yourself?
Morning, everyone. I'm Tom Hall. I'm the Director of Public Health for South Tyneside. I am not an academic by background. I'm a long-serving public health practitioner who has a keen interest in how we make things better and how we learn as we go to make things better for our wider population. So I'm very keenly involved in this space because I know it can lead to better outcomes, and research-involved organisations are better performing organisations. But it also means I come at this from a very different perspective. I come at it from more of a lay perspective than an academic perspective. So I'm always learning about the new terminology and the different language and the confusing world of academia. And you might all think it's very simple, but trust me, it's not. And so I guess my role here is always to look at things through a slightly different lens. I do have a number of hats in this space though, so I am linked with the Applied Research Collaboration, worked with Eileen on the initial submission, and I am the Deputy Director for the Health Inequalities and Marginalised Communities work stream. And I am a linked Director of Public Health to the local CRN, so working with Sarah and my colleague Alice Wiseman, who's the DPH in Gateshead. We are DPHs who are part funded to support the work of the LCRN and learn about building research capacity in local governments. We've got the wonderful Meg Logan working with us as part of that, and obviously Anna Christie and my team, who's been a real enzyme in helping develop more research capacity and knowledge within South Tyneside. So she's been an absolute driving force behind a lot of this.
That's great, Tom. Thank you. I mean, your different perspective is very welcome, and I would say you're an expert by experience in local government research. So that perspective is more than appreciated. So thank you for joining us. I would sort of like to kickstart this discussion with all these wonderful people in the panel on some of the questions posted in the chat, and had a quick look, and Leslie Haley is going to keep me right here. I mean, there were some questions after Brian's presentation, particularly about the HDA, the health determinants, research collaborations, and I think Brian has kindly agreed to sort of take any questions that related to those after the meeting. So we'll forward those questions on to him. So I will propose not to answer those questions here, but pick them up with Brian later, although we can touch upon the opportunity it represents for the North East, absolutely, and local authorities. I think some of the other questions I've seen were particularly sort of other presentation that Joe and her colleagues Angela and did, particularly around the capacity framework and toolkit that they mentioned, and whether that could be made available to other local authorities and researchers. And I think I saw the answer in chat was yes, but maybe Angela, Joe, and the other colleague whose name escaped me, apologies, Dia Lupa, can maybe clarify if that's the case. I can't see any. Angela, Dia Lupa, and Joe.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't know if Joe wanted to take that or not.
Okay.
Yes, I mean, it is a transferable framework. It's very much a kind of high level system outline, really, as to kind of what needs to be in place at different levels of the organisation and across different organisations. So it is fully transferable and translatable across different organisations. With regard, the only thing on that I couldn't answer, which is what I asked Joe to jump into, is whether it is in public domain as yet. It was certainly, obviously, it's embedded in the NIHR report that went to NIHR. So if it is available in the public domain, it'll be available on their website. And if it is, then we can share it as well. But I'm not entirely sure where it's at yet.
Okay, that's fine. We can clarify that, and so it's in the public domain, but we can share it with people on the call.
Yep, lovely.
Great. Leslie, can I check with you? Were there any questions that I've missed so far? Ashley's got her hand up. So Ashley, would you like to come in?
I guess just to pick up your point, Peter, whilst everybody else is thinking of questions, and maybe we can just talk about this briefly. There was the question about the HDRCs, the research collaborations, and I specifically asked Brian about the question about that one local authority with different HEAs. And I think we should just acknowledge the sort of elephant in the room here a little bit, that this call presents a challenge to us within FEWS, because obviously we're very much about working together across the region, local authorities and academia. And I think this does present us a challenge. I don't know the solution to this. I think that's something that could be asked by those that might be attending the workshops. I think it's clear that each local authority can work with different HEIs. I would very much like to think anybody that's going in from the region would be able to cite FEWS as well as those, and the capacity across FEWS. But the real question for me is, when they say support from HEIs and academias, what does that actually look like? And that might limit how many different local authorities each HEI can actually collaborate with, in terms of, is it posts in kind? Is it shared funding for posts and so forth? So I think that's the real question. I'd like to think that, you know, all of those could cite FEWS as that wider capacity and how we can all learn from each other. But I think we just have to acknowledge it presents us a bit of a challenge, the way that it's been framed.
Absolutely, Ashley, and thank you for that. We like a challenge, but yeah, this seems to be an additional challenge that is maybe not needed. But maybe the workshops that will be organised might provide some clarity on the answer to that question. And I fully agree with your plug. If we can mention FEWS in as many as possible to see how we can stimulate a collaborative working across local authorities and universities, all the better. So that's a good call. I'm just going back to Leslie. Leslie, did you see any more questions in the chat popping up regarding the presentations that have been raised before I go to Eileen?
Hello. There was just a comment from Anna Christie about the different languages used in academia, local authorities, clinical research networks, etc. An interesting point.
Anna, would you maybe like to come in and sort of clarify that point a bit? Because I think it's essential what we are talking about. If you're working across research systems and different local authorities, there are language issues. So in your own reflections, what is helpful in addressing some of these language issues?
But yeah, it was just more of a passing comment building on what Tom was saying, really. But I have like many people on the call, multiple hats. So I've been in academia, doing my PhD with Fuse, and then working in local authority, and I have a small role with the CRN, working with Sarah. Forever it is a challenge, the different terminology and way people interact, and it's not just acronyms. And it's just, and that the piece of work I did with working with Joe Gray was really useful. And I think I'm hoping it was in a two-way street to kind of understand the language in local authorities, as well as kind of working across academia and kind of building that shared understanding. And I think really it's only from kind of more collaboration and working together that can be solved. I was going to kind of put Sarah on the spot later on. Just I still don't think we've kind of clarified from the CRN what support is available to public health. The MapMe2 is a good example, but it's very much more akin to trials that the CRN traditionally can support, but public health isn't always like that, and kind of counting people going through studies is, again, a challenging metric that doesn't always fit. So it's just, yeah, early days, and I think it's only from kind of continued collaboration that we'll kind of probably address and solve this.
That's a good point, in the sense that there are two sort of different issues in a sense. So the one is that the language issue, and how do you resolve that? And as you point out rightly, I think around sort of relationship building and clarifying different concepts and languages is key in that process. The other is then how do you support that process from sort of a research infrastructure and funding perspective, including the CRN offer for public health. So that's a nice challenge you put down to Sarah, and I'm not sure if she wants to pick it up at this point or a bit later.
Yeah, I'm welcome to come in there, Anna, and completely agree with you about the challenges that this poses. And Ashley was absolutely right. And I think Caroline's unfortunately had to leave the call, but it may not feel that way from looking at the clinical research network that Caroline presented, but really compared to some regions, our LCRN is very much committed to trying to understand our language, understand the way that local authorities work, and to support research in that context. But all the time, things come down in terms of the way that the funding models work for the CRN, the way that their performance monitoring and management works, and the way that their core staff is trained and the skill set that they have is very much around delivering, often drugs trials in hospitals, which, as we know, for Brian mentioned at the start, democracy and the role of public health research and the type of research that goes on, a lot of that doesn't always fit. So I guess we're on a journey, and I think through all of this talking and partnerships and connections are important. So a plea from the CRN and particularly the public health things, for example, you will have seen green shoots landing, and perhaps some of that terminology and that wording doesn't mean anything. All we'd say is we're trying to reach out, and through Anna, Scott and Lucy, who are our engagement leads across the region, please do come and talk to us about these things, and we can try and demystify. And we're also learning together to work out how we can fit public health. But yes, at the moment it feels a little bit like the shoe that doesn't quite fit at the foot. But let's keep talking, and let's keep working together, and let's work through it. And I am assured that particularly from my perspective, from the clinical research network, the will is there to make systems and processes better fit to public health. But at the moment, some of the academic language, and particularly the clinical language that comes down from the CRN, doesn't fit right. So I agree with you there, Anna.
Great, that's a good call to action, Sarah. Thank you very much for that clarification. I'm conscious that Eileen had a hand up first and then Tom, so I'm going to go to Eileen first.
I'm happy for Tom to join in on this.
That's very kind of you, Eileen. Thank you. Tom, would you like to come in?
Thanks, Eileen, and thanks, Sarah. I suppose my point, Sarah made my point really, which is it's not just language, which is really important, but it is systems and process as well. And it's worth reflecting on kind of what local government feels like on a day-to-day basis and how driven it is by local communities and the connection between local authority and community. So there's very much a kind of here and now element to it. So pace is something that ends up being really important, as well as what we define as evidence. So evidence to an elected member or often an officer of the council is what someone's told them from their communities, not necessarily what they've gleaned from a research study. And I think this is where we need to think about how we embed that with how local government make decisions at this point in time and how they put their services in place. There needs to be a little bit more of a coalescing around systems, processes and language, and then how we put those things into practice. It's a real challenge and one that we're kind of looking at this point in time, but it really does link back to the, I guess, the culture point that Brian was started with. Really, this is, you know, NHS research has been well embedded for a long period of time. We've got a real journey to go on here, particularly working with the systems and processes we've got within local government, but how far apart they are from existing research structures. So it's quite a big elephant to eat, I'm afraid.
Thanks, Tom. That's very helpful, and it's a big elephant, but an important one to eat, really. And your points about culture and coalescing systems are well made, and also maybe linked to one of the questions that I've just spotted in the chat, where they sort of talk about. This is a question posed by Glenn Wilson about the point that Dot made in her presentation about how to align timescales for research with the need for rapid input for influence decisions in local authority. So that different timescales is one issue in coalescing the systems. And I wonder if maybe Dot, if she's available, could come in on that and how they sort of, what their recommendation, particularly around that barrier and challenge was in the project that she was leading.
Yeah, this has been something we've struggled with the whole time we've been at Durham. We've done about 20 evaluations for them, and we've really worked out a system. But at the most, and it's taken this long, we can only do an evaluation. We've got one over 2 years, but mostly they want a quick evaluation over 6 months. Now, we might all agree that you can't do that. We can't do anything really in depth, but the reality is they have to make decisions on their money quickly. So we can look and see what evidence is available, and we do that on something. But when we first started, we actually had the services decommissioned before we'd finished the evaluation. Now, what we've been doing in Middlesbrough, which is quite exciting, is we've been doing COVID recovery work. So we've been doing lots of qualitative work about what the community want in response. Now, you can do that quite quickly, but the major problem for me is as soon as you involve NHS, you've got NHS ethics, and that can take 6 months. Well, at the minute, it can take a year. So, but the good thing about working with public health teams is you can negotiate this through the public health team doing some of that work and us doing others. So there's this training in both ways. And we've learned that the hard way to make it easy. I still think it's worth every moment, but I wonder if the NIHR are looking at this from a different, well, I know they are looking at it from a different angle to what the LAs are looking at it for. They're not, you know, they want to work with us on randomized controlled trials, £1 million trials, but really what they need is something quick and as good as we can give. And my first email to them is, you know, whenever we do a new evaluation is, we can't show effectiveness, but we can show you what people think about this. And I think that's really clear. And you know, our work at Durham went into an impact statement. That's how important it is. So, you know, I think there is a disconnect between the two. I think it's getting better. I hope these centres will make it easier. But another bit, sorry, I'm going on here. Another massive problem for us is overheads, because local authorities put their research bids through a system that they have that is the same system for ordering toilet rolls. So it comes through the university and we have to charge 100% overheads. So if anybody in the Northeast gets one of these centres, can you please sort out how local authorities can apply for research funding that they can put on it? We will only pay this amount of overheads, and they do put it on. But if it goes through that system, we have to charge 100% overheads. So I end up in weeks of emails. Sorry, I will stop now. You did ask me.
Thanks, that's helpful. You highlight some of the bigger system questions and barriers, and sort of also mentioned sort of the expectation management is really important in that process of what's feasible and doable within there, but also how can we change them. Ashley, you've got your hand up. Would you like to come in at this point?
I just want to pick up the point now there from Helen Gallen put in the chat, and Helen works in our grants and contracts within the university, and makes some really good points about some of the issues that need to be addressed, which are being discussed here. Helen, you might want to come in and say something about this, and in just a second, because I think it would be interesting to get your perspective. There are some opportunities in terms of the new FIRST, and that Peter and I and Mandy are involved in, and other people across Fuse. And so far, we've been spending our time doing evaluations of local authorities outside of the Northeast, and that's frustrating. So please put people in, and we'll make sure you get that opportunity. The call is about to come out again, and we really want to be able to do that. And I put something in the chat about the practitioner evaluation scheme for mental health as well, which has just come out. All of that is fully funded. The issue around funding is completely removed there. So there are opportunities that may be of interest. Peter, can we maybe ask Helen just to speak from a university's perspective on some of the issues
absolutely, Helen,
that have been raised there?
Yeah, hi Ashley, thank you for that. Just, I think what we've had quite a few good examples now of really good projects, and I have enjoyed those presentations, and I think it's a good time to sort of reflect, because different local authorities are at very different levels and a different understanding as well, like you say, Ashley, about how they might sort of recover their costs. Some are more sort of, if you like, see it as a service, some are seeing it as research. So it would be good to sort of, if you like, reflect on what we've done so far, especially as well, and feed this into the NIHR, because often we're forced into using agreements, if you like, that sit within the clinical area, like model site agreements. I'm sure we've all been through that pain of adapting a site agreement to reflect a local authority, which is a completely different beast. So I do think it's time to sort of, now that we've got some really good practical examples, picking up on Dot's points as well, it would be good if I'm more than happy to sort of try and coordinate a smaller group to sort of look at that and sort of say, if we did it again, what would we do? And I think as well, the CRN's point as well about their advice about data processing, and it might be that we can avoid some pitfalls if we just had that better understanding of how to transfer data. So I'll stop there because I'm conscious of time, but it would be great if I could sort of link in with your team, Ashley, and find out it would be best to sort of perhaps catch up later on with. Thank you.
Helen, that's a fantastic offer, and I think there's something we can do within Fuse here in bringing together some of the HEIs across the region and some of the local authorities, and learn from good practice across in different places and how we can do this together better. So really good offer. Thank you, Helen. We'll be back to you.
Is this a good time, Peter, for me to
absolutely, Aline, you've been very patient, so please
put my virtual hand back up? It feels out of time in a way, because I wanted to pick up what Ashley said about the health determinants research collaborations and just mention the ARC. And I think it's relevant to the last conversation as well, because there are all 6 universities in the ARC, and there's capacity in all 6 universities because of that infrastructure. I think the infrastructures are actually really important, and it's also important to remember that these new health determinants research collaborations are more infrastructure. They're about having capacity and people to be able to move forward research. It's not about research projects. And if I think about this whole question, the conundrum we have before us, we've got to think about, do we have the relationships in place? Yes, and Fuse has been central to that. Have we got the capacity? Well, I think we do have more than we've ever had. We just now need to know how to join it up and use it well and get more, so use it as leverage. Have we got the skills? There are lots of mechanisms, I think, at the moment to try to build skills, not just for early career researchers in universities, but also for practitioners. And there are practitioner secondment opportunities available, currently being advertised through the ARC as well. Time is going to be devil us all, but actually we need to think about the fact that we need the capacity. So there are some people who have more time to help those who have a little less time, so we can pull these sorts of things together. You do need some element of track record, and I think the 3 local authority system bids have been hugely important to put a stamp down to show that the North East and North Cumbria do have track records, and they've secured NIHR funding, and there are others on the call today that can help with that. And then we do need to think about the environment, and I'm going to say this in a few ways, and probably one bit will not be very popular. So in terms of the environment, I think this is a very cooperative sort of region and lots of good pieces in place. All local authorities are different. It's a bit like all families, where they all operate sort of differently, and they're all at different stages of development. So it may be that some are better placed early to go for these collaborations, and some are on the pipeline to do that one. But I think that's a different conversation for a different room. But also, I think we need to think about the fact that this event today is very much about local authorities' research systems. It's got a strong public health imprint, and that's where NIHR's mind is. And I'm completely aware of that. But we also have to understand that local authorities have a strong social care footprint, and there are many levers there that extend the reach of public health. So we have to think about housing, addiction services, mental health, safeguarding, planning, licensing. So we have to also see that the whole of the local authority has got a number of players in there that strengthen the arm of public health. And that's what the Newcastle Local Authority Systems bid had within it. It was trying to help bring social care somewhere closer to the level that public health had developed within that local authority. Because although different local authorities are in different areas, when you look about at the players within a single local authority, there is a slight difference in terms of the maturity, for instance, of public health, and then also the maturity and where research is up to in terms of social care as well. So whilst I'm fully aware that there is a strong intent for these opportunities to really strengthen public health itself is strengthened by its relationality with social care and many of the other departments and players within the local authority system. And I do think we have to see that as one system with all of the levers that it has to try to look at wider determinants.
Thanks, Eileen. That's very helpful and a good call to look beyond public health and social care. And that sort of also relates to one of the questions that have been posted in the chat, particularly because we talked about sort of the system barriers and trying to coalesce the systems and some of the practical issues around that, and capacity building and skills. The point is well made by yourself through the ARCs and other infrastructures. But there was also a question about how to best amalgamate the strategic priorities regarding public health research across those different infrastructures, so the clinical health research networks, local authorities, ARCs, Fuse. And I wonder if that's a question that the panel can pick up. So how can we amalgamate those different strategic priorities? And also whether Joe has her hand up. So maybe Joe can come in first. Maybe he's got a particular response to this question, and then we can maybe ask some of the panel members to share their thoughts on this.
Hi. Yeah, sorry, I've been stopped from sharing my video. Obviously on the naughty list.
We can still hear you, Joe, so that's good.
Oh God. Yeah, sorry, I totally agree with what Eileen has said, that it's very difficult. The functions, we need to look at the function of the local authority in its widest sense here, and that it's not just about, this is about public health in its widest sense, with multiple departments feeding into that kind of like much wider sort of definition, if you like. Secondly, just quickly, I wanted to go back to something that Doc was mentioning about sort of the timescales with evaluation, and it's something that came out of the shifting the gravity of spend work that we did. I think as academics, we have to look at more fast and frugal methodologies that is fit for purpose within local authority. And I think that we haven't addressed that, and that's something that sort of is picked up in the ARC enabling methodology stream, which I work with Luke on shifting the gravity of spend, and that's where that came from, that emphasis. So I think, you know, as an academic community, we don't want to water down our methodologies, but we need to make sure that what we do is good enough and fit for purpose. Thanks.
Thanks, Joe. Absolutely. So methodology is now the issue that we could look at as part of that sort of amalgamating and coalescing between different systems. And like I said, the ARC theme does that with the different fellows that are working with Luke and yourself to do that. Can I turn back to that question that I raised about the strategic priorities across the infrastructures? And does someone in the panel maybe want to pick up that question, how they see that work?
I'm not sure what you mean. I may not have quite caught this, so sorry about that, my bad. But at the moment, we have lots of different infrastructures because they are commissioned and the tenders come out at different points. But what I find is it's many of the same individuals who are trying to secure these infrastructures in the Northeast. What I also find is that the alignment is better than it's ever been. So it's absolutely clear, and I say this to anybody who wants to listen, the ARC was built very much on the foundations that Fuse had laid down, and the School of Public Health Research and other infrastructures. It was able to use another opportunity to extend more widely and actually bring under the canvas voluntary sector and social care colleagues with public health, primary care, NHS, etc. And I think we are all in the same rooms multiply. The problem we do have is, whilst we've got more capacity than we had, we don't have quite enough to meet all the needs that we would want to address. And I do think, actually, perhaps in my last contribution, there was something I was going to say, and I'm going to say it here. Thinking forward to these health determinants research collaborations, one thing I think we need to take a little bit more seriously is a bit of a lesson out of the medical playbook, and that is to have joint posts across local authorities and different universities. It's not just have embedded researchers funded in one place, living in another place. This is to get the universities put their skin in and the local authorities to put some skin in, and to create joint posts with enough time to build the right relationships, to have shared endeavour, to do work that is both flexible, agile, and also to do work that is slightly more long and deeply rooted. I mean, the reality of the matter is that all of us are doing work that's essentially off account, quick, helping our colleagues, and we're doing larger studies as well. It's not one thing or another thing. I don't know anybody who does just one kind of research and leaves the other kind. But what we don't have is quite enough time and quite enough bodies. And I do think if we can actually put some pressure on all 6 universities, we sometimes forget the 6th, to actually try and actually match some funding and make some posts in this space, that would be the way to get a slightly better founded system.
Thank you, Eileen. And that's absolutely, it's come back to the capacity issue. There's not enough bodies on the ground, in spite of all the new infrastructures and the wider remit that this provides. But that still comes back to the point, if you've got limited bodies, and even if you can increase those bodies, what do those bodies focus on? So what are the key priorities across those infrastructures that we really need to address? And Brian sort of provided some pointers for that in his opening presentation around sort of the translational context, the financial context in local government. So I'm just wondering if we can tease out some of these priorities that we can address across these infrastructures. And I've just seen Sarah put a hand up, so maybe she has some words of wisdom to share there.
Well, I think it wouldn't be me that has the wisdom. I think it's the communities and the people out there within our local communities that has the wisdom and the priorities. And I think a lot of listening to the presentations that I've heard and the community outrage that was part of that, and also as Tom was saying, where's the evidence for action for local authority decision making? It is there amongst all the people. So what I would more see is Fuse as an excellent conduit through which, as is the ARC, as the CRN continues to build its capacity in this landscape through its work on joint posts and so on and so forth. These hopefully the mechanisms that we can take the priorities of the people, of the communities that we serve, through into research that means something and matters to them. And obviously, as people know, my particular focus on research into inequalities, and that obviously being a massive thing for the North East and North Cumbria region. So, I guess in terms of priorities, I think we need to look bottom up and we need to find those out there. And I think that's where working in partnership with local authorities is so powerful, because that's where we will find those answers. In terms of strategic alignment and things, I think it's absolutely true that there's an awful lot of opportunities, resource, things coming from all different directions in this area. And I think what we're trying to do, and Eileen's right in saying it's the same people around the table often in different conversations, and it's this weaving of threads between things. So you know, a case in point, the ARC open funding calls that are out, and CRN has targeting health needs bids, and it's about how we coordinate those processes together. So I think as more opportunities land, it's around the stitching together and embedding and enmeshing of these, where as systems and processes and leaders together across these spaces, we need to work hard to mesh together. So I think they would be my 2 points on that.
Thanks, Sarah. Very helpful and a good plea for sort of that bottom-up work, community-focused and community-led public health priorities. And I think Tom wants to come in, hopefully, on that. And I think I'm conscious of time, so I think Tom will be the last question we can address at this point.
Yeah, I suppose it's a little bit of a reflection on what I've just heard, and perhaps something we all need to consider in terms of how we flip what we're asking for here. Sometimes systems and processes can be really frustrating and can be barriers if we ask the question, can we do something? Can we do this? Can we do that? Because if you ask a procurement person or you ask an HR person, the stock answer is usually no, isn't it? So I think there's something about how we flip the question here and say, how do we do this? How can we make this happen? How can we put this contract in place? How can we put this person in post? How can we get around this particular issue? Because I think we run the risk of allowing the system to dictate what we can and can't do, whereas actually what we're saying is we want to do really good stuff together. And I think that's perhaps a challenge we need to go away with, to say, how do we get around some of these barriers and engage the right people in navigating some of the existing systems, while then looking retrospectively and trying to fix those problems as well. But I think there's something about just being able to get on. I mean, I personally, even with the CRN role, had to fill in numerous HR forms about my inoculation history, just because it happened to be Newcastle Hospital's contract. You know, I was going to go nowhere near any patients or have the risk of contracting Hep B, but for some reason I had to dig out all my inoculation history for it. It's a daft example, I know, but if you put that on a bigger scale, you can see the sort of challenges we might face if we always say, okay, this must be done because someone's told us it's got to be done. We need to flip that and say, right, this isn't appropriate. How do we get around this?
Excellent, Tom. I think that's a great note, and the discussion answer, the positive flip the system and see how we can make things happen and work within those system limitation and barriers, and be a bit of a rebel sometimes is not a bad thing. So at this point, I mean, there's lots more interesting questions in the chat that unfortunately we can't answer today, but we will try to put them to our members afterwards and share any responses with you. And simply there's a lively discussion in the chat on some of the points being made by our panel members. So we'll save the chat and circulate that as well, so people have a record of that, as well as the presentations and recording of today. At this stage, I really want to thank all our speakers and panel members for their generous contributions today. It's been a very lively discussion and very helpful in light of all the debates and activities going on, and great to see all these awards and opportunities being available. And as said, all the ones posted in the chat will be made available, so you can have a look at those at your leisure. So a big thank you to all those, and to yourselves for joining us today and contributing to our conversations and discussions. A quick plug at the end for some new research meetings coming up within Fuse. So we've got various engaging and interesting research program meetings coming up. One on the impact of social prescribing, health and well-being, which shouldn't be missed. It's on Monday, the 11th of October. And there's one also on parental substance use and young people's resilience, which promises to be another interesting program meeting. So please put them in your calendar. Don't forget to sign up. A lot of the information can all be found on our website. And there's also a quality research meeting coming up on supporting smokers to quit. And that's an interesting combination of computer modeling and qualitative research, one not to be missed. So lots of events coming up in Fuse. But in this case, thank you very much for your attention and hope you have a great day. Take care.